Hello and welcome back to History of the English Language with Dr. Newman. First, let's talk about language change itself, which is the broad overview of the subject that we're studying. We happen to be looking at the specific case of English, but there are things we need to know about language itself and how it changes in order to better understand the specific history of English. To that end, we're going to do three things in this short lecture, hopefully short. First is we're going to talk about just an overview of linguistics and what linguistics studies and how it's organized and its basic assumptions. We're going to talk about the different, broadly speaking, about the different categories of types of language change, the way that words change meaning, and we're going to talk briefly about how we think about what causes change and how to what slows down change. Any history class is the study of change, but also of continuity, of what survives, of what continues. You know, here we are in a university, and it's certainly changed. The fact that you're taking this course online is indicative of that, but at the same time, the university is an institution that goes back to the late 1100s. And then we're going to talk very quickly about the broad organization of the history of English, the different periods of study that we generally divide English into, and which, to a certain extent, organize the different units of this course. Now, first of all, one of the basic assumptions is that all languages are systematic. What does that mean? It means that every language is organized as a system. It has pattern, it has order, it has rules, it has regularity. It's not just a bunch of random data. You can organize it into grammar and give you a sense of the overall view of the rules. And linguists divide the system of language into a number of different sort of subsystems according to the level of organization. And that level of organization goes from the very concrete, which is the sound of the language itself, up to the very abstract, which is the kind of discourses that sentences are organized into. Let's go through that more slowly. First of all, we have phonology, which studies the way that sound organizes language. And I invite you to look at the recommended video on phonology and to read the Millward chapter in the recommended reading on phonology to get a better sense. But basically, one of the key things you need to understand about phonology is that it studies not just how sounds are made or processed, but the way that they form systems of meaning. And the fundamental building block of meaning in language is the phoneme. The phoneme is not the same as a sound. P and B, as in Peter versus beater, are different sounds. In English, every language is a different phonemic system, a different phonological system. So, for example, in Arabic, most dialects of Arabic that I know of, P and B are not phonemic. They are not different sounds, and therefore, to say pab and bob, which is the word for door, is to say the same thing. In a lot of East Asian languages, I know Chinese and Japanese, R and L are not phonemic. They are closely similar sounds, and this is why they can be mistaken by English language learners. But we don't distinguish between th as in theater and the as in this. Those are different sounds. One is voiced and one is unvoiced, but we think of it as the same sound. So both of those are allophones of one phoneme, whereas in Arabic, those are different phonemic sounds. They're a minimal pair. Th and the might mean something different. So that's phonology. That's looking at how language is organized into sound. Next, we have morphology. And this sort of looks at bigger chunks. As we go to each level, we're going to think about sort of widening the chunk of meaning that language is made up of. So morphology studies the way the chunks that are the basic units of words. So, for example, settle is a noun, right? It's got it's a verb. It's got two syllables, and it is a morpheme itself. It is a minimal unit of lexical meaning, of vocabulary, but you can add other morphemes to it, what are called bound morphemes, rather than free morphemes, such as un or ing. So settle, you add the morpheme ing to the end. Settling, it has a different meaning. Then you add the morpheme un to the beginning, unsettling. So affixes, such as prefixes and suffixes, are morphemes, and so we can look at the different morphemes in a system, the way that morphemes can form different tenses. We can think of he, his, and him as all being different morphemic variations of the same word according to the function in a sentence. And then that brings us to the next level of language, and we're going to go over this again using various examples. I'm just giving you an overview right now. The next level is syntax, and that's how language organizes different words into meaning. So morphemes are built out of phonemes. Words, lexical items, are built out of morphemes, and syntax or sentences are built out of words. And the lexicon is the system of words of a language. It's all the words that exist in a language, or as in the hypothetical competence of an imaginary speaker who knows the language perfectly. A lot of linguistics sort of imagines that this speaker exists, even though they never do. Nobody knows all the vocabulary of a language, but there is a kind of an imaginary complete vocabulary of a language, even though it's always changing. Syntax talks again about how language organizes words into meanings. So we know that, when I say I kick the ball, that the ball isn't kicking me, that I'm the one whose foot is whacking the ball, because the word I comes first. If I were to say the ball kick I, well, you might get a little confused for a second, but you would still know that I kick the ball because the word I is the subject pronoun. Again, this is all going to become clearer. This is just an overview to give you a sense of the complexity and of the system of language and the way that it's organized from sound up to paragraph. Another aspect of language that's systematic is meaning. And this is the branch of linguistics known as semantics. And this crosses over with philosophy, but it talks about how words mean things, and it talks about how meaning can change. And this is one of the things that we're going to study is how meaning changes, and how when the meaning of a word changes, it can often cause a chain shift and push the meanings of other words. And then, of course, there's the study of graphics, which is a technical term. We're not using it in the broad sense of like, hey, good graphics on that video game or whatever, but in the sense of how language is visually represented. That is what graphics studies. So there's the alphabets, such as we use in the Greek and Hebrew and Arabic, but then there are syllabaries, where there are individual symbols not just for particular sounds, but for an entire syllable. So, for example, you might have a different symbol for ka, ku, ki, ke. The Sanskrit writing system and the Korean writing system are both examples of syllabaries. And then there are logograms, less accurately called ideograms, such as we find in Chinese and Japanese writing. And then another aspect of linguistics is pragmatics, which talks about discourse in context. It studies how we use language in idiomatic ways to indicate relationships, processes. So if I'd say, would you hold on a moment, please? Then it would study what that is doing in the context. Hold on to what? Obviously, that doesn't mean something that you're specifically holding on to something. So pragmatics studies how we practically understand and use language in interaction with each other. These are the different levels, so to speak, of language. This is a way that we slice up language. And so when we talk about language change, we're going to talk about how each of these different systems changes. We're going to be looking at changes in phonology. Old English had sounds that we don't, like hla. You would have an HL sound, hlaf, which is means in modern English loaf, like a loaf of bread. Morphology, morphemes change over time. So the idea of progressive action that we identify with the word with the ending ing in Old and Middle English was often represented by the sound and or end. So thinkand rather than thinking. Isn't that weird? Syntax has changed over time for reasons that are too complex to get into now. Obviously, anybody who's ever tried to read Shakespeare knows that our lexicon has changed over time, and it continues to change. New words are being coined all the time. So a lot of linguistic study imagines language as a synchronic system. That is a language at a slice in time. But we study language as a diachronic system. This is a really inefficient way of doing this. Not synchronic. We're not studying language at a point in time, but diachronic, language as it takes place through time. Okay,